Hello, everyone, and I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to this special edition of Instruction Discussion, where we usually examine recent trends and developments in education and their impact on the districts around us. Tonight, we welcome Mr. Jared Sams, who is a self-taught artist who creates impactful graphic novels that channel his hip hop and punk music influences to help children develop unique skills, passions, and creative expressions. His latest project, Black and Blue, is the story of two African American brothers who grow up with very different views. Dante becomes a community activist, while his brother Jackson becomes a police officer, all in the midst of the racial strife of police brutality and Black Lives Matter protest marches. We welcome to this special edition of Instruction Discussion, Mr. Jared Sams.
Hey, how you doing, Kevin? Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for putting this project together and bringing to light, well, not necessarily bringing to light the issues, but approaching this issue from a fresh perspective. And I think a lot of the things that you're doing and that we're going to bring out this evening will show people that there is a different way. There's a different way to express themselves. There's a different way to start this conversation. And as we like to say, we want to see where we can go with this, how we can start this conversation and make sure that we can begin the healing process. So again, thank you for putting this project together.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the conversation is super important to have. So anything I could do to help facilitate that, it's an honor, honestly.
No, great. Like I said, we're definitely glad that you're able to do this for us. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention that this book is being produced by our friends at Light Switch Learning. And we have a couple of representatives from Light Switch Learning here as well, who will be able to come on a little bit later on to say a few words and talk to you more about this great project, this great book, and different ways that it can be made available to everyone. So first, let's get into some of our discussion here. So tell us a little bit, how did you actually get into illustration and what prompted you to create Black and Blue?
Yeah. Well, actually, I had a very circuitous route to get to illustration. I'd always been interested in, even as a kid, loved drawing stuff, doodling in like notebooks and on homework and stuff like that. But actually, my background's more film. Like I went into film and screenwriting and stuff like that. But at some point, I just had a lot to say. And I feel like the easiest, most direct way to say it was just to use my artistic ability to tell the stories that I want to tell. Like there's an old adage from a comic book kind of scholar that comics are just words and pictures. You could do anything with words and pictures. So that's how I came to be an illustrator. Just taking my own classes and just working hard and kind of doing it, in my spare time kind of thing. In terms of Black and Blue, I actually wasn't the originator of the idea. I was approached a bit by Light Switch Learning. They make very, they're educators, right? And they're publishers, and they're trying to put out really culturally resonant stuff, right? So they wanted to put out something that spoke to the moment we're in, or at least what we're in last year, and I guess we're still in today. And I was actually doubtful whether or not I'd actually be the voice for that. Like I had so much to say. I had so much outrage, anger, frustration, kind of helplessness. There's so much going on. And ultimately, though, I thought to help process all that stuff, it might be helpful to create this book, right? And not only as a way for myself to process what's happening, but maybe as a tool to help others do the same.
No, like I said, I think it's definitely a great way to get into that self-expression, because I'm sure, like you, a lot of people around the country or even around the world are having feelings that they don't know how to deal with, and not just around the racial strife, but just from the being cooped up because of the pandemic itself. So I think it was like the perfect storm of things that came together. And so now people have to figure out a way, how do I, in a positive way, deal with all of these emotions that are turning and churning inside of me so that it can be I can get rid of it productively. And I think that's one of the things that this book will allow people to do, to be able to see a productive way to work out their feelings and so forth. Plus, I think our students will be able to understand all those people who were the doodlers in class and coming up with the little cartoons on their notebooks when they're supposed to be paying attention in math class, will see that, you know what, maybe there is a future for them in some kind of way, in at least in artwork or something, creating their own comic books and so forth.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. Like for me, drawing actually helped me concentrate. So, for any teachers out there who think their students aren't paying attention while they're doodling, sometimes, that helps them focus a little bit more. So you never know.
And I do have to also mention that Light Switch Learning is a leading K-12 publisher of culturally responsive resources. So, in which this falls under, the Black and Blue definitely falls under. So, we definitely want to make sure that we are able to let everyone know that when you're, especially our educators out there, when you're looking for those culturally responsive texts that you want your students to have, especially if that's something that's on grade level, they should be looking towards this particular book. But let me ask you this. Were Dante and Jackson kind of based on real people in your life that you know? Did you know Dante and Jackson?
It's funny. I talked to my sister about the book. We all read it together as a family to talk about it and stuff. But she's convinced Dante. She's my older sister. She's convinced Dante is based on her. I guess there's a little bit of that, right? I think when you create anything, you're taking inspirations from all parts of your life, right? Past, present. So I'm sure there is there is that. But for me, Jackson and Dante are people, are characters that I created because I don't know, I just thought they spoke to the story and the themes that we were sort of approaching, right? And I infused them with bits of humanity that, I have, or like, yes, that my family has, or my friends have, or whatever. But ultimately, Jackson and Dante are kind of their own creations, they're their own beings in a way.
No, because I think that it becomes where this is important is everybody can see I think everybody has a Dante or a Jackson in their family. And
Right.
or they may be that person, or they may see something of themselves in one of those two characters, because again, they are rather diametrically opposed to each other. One is law enforcement, one is a community activist. But because they're coming from the same family, they still have those family connections, those family ties that they have to navigate as well as they go through their particular um, uh, their particular paths. So the way that you describe Jackson so well, do you have law enforcement officers or police officers in your family as well that you kind of got some influence from?
I actually don't, not in the family. I mean, I have family who are in the military,
Mm.
family who serve in government, but no law enforcement. That said, I have friends, I mean, like I know people who serve in law enforcement, and honestly, I'm a kid of the '80s, so in a way, police were always sort of like fascinating to me. Like my hero as a kid was like Axel Foley from Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's just police. As like I said, as a child, growing up, for me, police were sort of people that you looked up to, right? They were heroes, and you wanted to be one when you grew up, or be cool like that. So that's kind of what my background was of it. So kind of coming up, or living through the times we're living in, and becoming a man from a boy. You start looking at the police a lot differently. You understand the history of the police, and so all that stuff kind of comes into it. But in terms of just, yeah, like um, you know, just the I have a lot of respect for police officers, and it was important for me to make sure that there was a lot of truth in in all characters, in both kind of like you said, like sides of the story, right? I wanted the cops to feel as realized as the activists, right? It was important to get there. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that that you thought they were fleshed out, because that was definitely something I wanted to make sure we delivered on.
Yeah, no, because I know I actually part of my background, I was an educator for a long time and actually worked in the Bronx. So when you said the 42nd precinct, I was like, whoa, brought me back home and everything because that was my precinct when I worked up there, in the schools that I worked in. So I definitely, and especially when you the bodega on Morris Avenue, and I was like, oh yeah, I know where that is. I know that.
Yeah.
So it definitely made it real for me, and I
No.
could see myself having those conversations with my students who from that area, who would frequently come to me and say, hey, Mr. B, I just had this run in with this cop and this person and this that, and over the weekend they did this and that. So I would frequently have these conversations with them and so forth. So it definitely was made it real for me, and I'm just wondering how real it can be for other people who read this, who may not necessarily be from the Bronx, but can still recognize, oh, that could be Bushwick Avenue in Brooklyn. Oh, that could be Junction Avenue in Queens. That can be someplace else that's close to home for them.
I think the closer you get the details right, I think the easier it is to kind of like embrace yourself or immerse yourself in whatever whatever fiction is that you're reading or engaging with, right? So those details, they seem like oh, it's just if I said I could said any precinct and you would have got it, but giving the book a sense of place, a sense of time, yeah, like I said, I think that really helps uh, make the book stand out and make the book more effective. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that your students and all it's Bronx is very far away. I've never been to the Bronx myself.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
gonna ask you, I was like, because do you know New York City? Because you're in California, so how do you know about New York City stuff?
yeah, I'm California born and raised, Southern California specifically. I just love New York. New York is a great. I mean, I don't gotta tell you this. It's the greatest city in the world, right? Like, even I buy that. You know what I mean? Like, it's amazing. I'm hoping this book will make New York adopt me. Is that a thing? Like, can New York adopt people? If they
That
can,
we do all the time.
I'll put my application out there. New York, please adopt. Please take me. Yeah, it'd be great.
No, if you're real and so forth, we'll definitely adopt you. And so I think people, once they read this book, I mean, you already got the stamp of approval from Cheryl Wills, who is the preeminent newscaster here in New York. So you're
That's
good to
great.
go on that end. Everybody knows Cheryl Wills, so you're good. Now,
Yeah, that's that means a lot. Yeah, that means a lot. That if Cheryl can take me, then I think yeah, exactly. I think anyone uh, you know will find me
Now,
worthy.
those of you who are listening in and or watching this on our Facebook feed or even right here in our Zoom feed, if you do have any questions for our author illustrator, please feel free to post them in our chat area and we in the Q&A section, and we will definitely pass them along to him. Now, the book itself, let's get into the book a little bit, but the book itself opens up with some really powerful and vivid images. I think you try to give us a little bit of the history of the recent history anyway of some of the racial incidents that have been happening with involving the police. So, do you think that those images might be a little strong for the young audience that you might be targeting, or
You
this
know
book
the
might be targeting?
Yeah, the book is aimed at grades 6 to 12, right? And I just trying to put myself kind of use a time machine to travel way back to the Stone Age when I was that age, and I just feel like the more you want to be impactful, right? You want to make an impression, and so for me, showing honestly the chaos of a lot of those scenes was so important because it was real, it happened, right? Like, and I think students and young people, I think they can handle that, right? I think they want to handle that, and I think when you shy away from that stuff, it's like you said, talking about the details, getting all that stuff right. you know it's important to show it as it is, otherwise I feel like it's easy to sort of like write it off, right? Because you know it's and it's tough, right? Because there are things that I wanted to say and do that maybe were too advanced or too much, right? So it's a matter of finding that line of what you can and can't say, or what's effective to say, and how much of that is my emotions feeding into it, and how effective, productive that would be to forwarding my themes and forwarding the story of the book. But for me, especially the opening moments, like I said, it's important to just like grab your attention. It's important there, there's so many things out there that are vying for your time and vying for your attention. So I think more than anything, it's important to say, hey, look over here. We got something to say, and don't look away. And especially for our book, the things we presented, there it was real. Like a lot of those images, I literally, was drawing stuff, from newspaper articles and photos and Google searches. Like a lot of those signs we put in the book, there's protest signs, there's throughout the book, a lot of those signs come from actual protests. Like I said, it was important to not just tell the story, but to be a snapshot into the time that was, right? To what was happening last summer.
So, there's a line of dialogue that I kind of resonates with me that I found very compelling. That says, I think it was Pop was had said has stated this, the grandfather of the two young brothers here. He says that I love this country, son. It's my honor to serve, but I don't fight for what America is. I fight for what it can be. I think again that's such a compelling line, and I think that's probably the sentiment of a lot of our soldiers of color when they're confronted with the idea of or the question, why do you serve in the military? Why do you serve on any police force or something like that? So, how did you come up with that line?
I mean, like I said, it was important. There's a little bit of Dante and a little bit of Jackson in me, right? The part of me that's Dante is the part that, when you see these traumatic events happen, these murders, and like you're angry and you want to get out there, you want to put a fist in the air and say, all Black Lives Matter. You want to be there, but at the same time, there's a part of me that wants to believe the country we're in, that America, there's a lot of promises to this land, that those promises also apply to me, apply to the people that look like me, the people in my community. Um, and I think that's the sentiment of it, right? And I think there's also a history that we sometimes overlook. I think even our community, even Black community, but especially the wider American community, of a history of Black folks in, yeah, like I said, in the military, in the police, serving and being part of building what America is and building up our communities. And Pop, their grandfather, he was a police officer, and that's where a lot of the love that Jackson has for the police, a lot of the kind of hero worship he has comes from his hero worship and love for his grandfather, who was a police officer. And like I said, I think there's a promise to America that often, many people aren't served by it, but especially at least in this context, the Black community and just Black people in general, it just feels like we're not. That promise is often unresolved with us, right? It's
Right.
often we don't get that, right? And historically speaking, so but there's still that hope, right? Because we're here. It's like
Right. Right.
we are in this country, and as even as you see all these, like I said, yeah, you see all this injustice, and this time, obviously with Derek Chauvin, with George Floyd, there was a guilty verdict, but in the past that hasn't been the case, so it can feel very helpless. It can feel very like it doesn't matter, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So but I think for Jackson, he kind of represents not growing cynical about that and still fighting for it, right? Like change is happening. Like when I think about living in 1960, I'd rather live now than then, right?
Yeah.
So change is happening, but it's just happening at a very slow pace. And when people are dying, it can often feel much too slow. But that's the sentiment is,
Right.
um, yeah, you want to believe in that promise.
No, I definitely hear you on that. And for all my ELA teachers who may be listening, when I read that line initially, I made a little like a text to text comparison here because I took that line and it immediately made me think of the um the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and how the Black Falcon start finally assume the mantle of Captain America. And before that, though, there was this whole thing about, well, Captain America can't be black and he'll never be accepted, and so forth and so on. So he went through all of those same struggles about should I or shouldn't I, and then finally he decided, yeah, it's my duty to assume the mantle because of I'm fighting for what America can be as opposed to what it actually is. This shield represents what America should be and can be as opposed to what it actually is. So I think you can see those comparisons. You can start making those lines of comparison in a lot of different texts of literature as well as movies that we have out there as well.
Yeah, yeah. I was watching Falcon and Winter Soldier too, and I love that series. I had such a blast watching it, and it was really almost teared up at the end. But
You're not the only one. A bunch of us did. Like who's cutting onions around here?
yeah, I know exactly. I'm not crying, you're crying. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, even seeing some of those statements between Sam and the older Captain America, who went through so much just because he was black. That I was listening to those conversations, like, oh my God, like we wrote Black and Blue a year ago, so it's just like, oh my God, this is like it's zeitgeist, right? Serendipity. But I also want to acknowledge something that, like, I love that there's a black Captain America, but let's also not forget this Captain America has a rocket pack, and that is awesome. That is awesome in every single use of the word. So yeah.
So, and this actually that leads me to a question. We have a question from an audience member who said, "It seems that there are too many people who have absolute fixed opinions when with respect to issues concerning policing. Can there ever be peaceful, honest dialogue when expressing your views that result in hostility?"
Okay. Yeah. Look, I'm an optimist, right? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like my interactions uh, with police and even with people that I don't agree with. I don't have a. I kind of like talking to people, and I see a lot of the good in people, right? Um, Even when it's really hard to see that, right? So I think it's possible, right? But I do think that we have to know what we want from police, right? And we have to be good at expressing that, right? In the book, um, the characters keep journals, right? Their mother asks them to keep journals after, when they're young. They after the Trayvon Martin verdict and George Zimmerman being let off, or not guilty, they are going through stuff, right? They're trying to understand what's happening and they don't get it. But the mom tells them to make a journal so they can understand and process what's happening in their world. And ultimately, it just helps that you need to understand what you want and what you need in order to let other people understand what you want and what you need, right? Like when I think about a lot of the arguments I have with people, when a discussion becomes an argument, that line where it's just like, oh, we're just talking, but now we're yelling, you know what I mean? I
Mm-hmm.
feel like those moments, it's not so much I'm yelling at the person across from me. I feel like I'm frustrated with myself, right? Because I'm trying to get across an idea that I'm just having so much trouble, like making you understand what I'm trying to say. And so I'm getting frustrated. I'm raising my voice and getting animated. And then it's this weird feedback loop where nothing gets done. So I think it's possible, I think, to have change and to have, for things to actually move forward. But I think it means that people need to really understand what they want from each other, including, civilians and activists understanding what police should be, and understand and knowing how to express it, and police on the other side, um, being able to, voice their concerns in ways that, are productive. And the hope is at some point we come to some kind of reconciliation, or equilibrium.
And I think young Jackson actually probably put it best, or you had him say this in towards the end of the book, where he states that although the police received all this training and the training in how to deal with different situations and so forth, but maybe they should have been trained in how to listen.
Right.
And because we think about going back to the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, one of the things that he says in there is we spend a lot of time, we listen to respond rather than listening to understand.
Mm.
And I think that that's probably where the answer to Mr. Dobek's question is, if we're able to actually hold ourselves back so we can listen to each other to understand where the other person or the other side is coming from, that may be the beginning of having those civil conversations that we need to have, that civil discourse, so that we don't get to the point where we become hostile towards one another, because now we're understanding each other. And like you said, understanding exactly what we want out of the service that the police is going to give us. And the police need to understand what they want out of the service that they are providing. Because to be fair, yes, we should not be calling on the police when it comes to matters of mental illness or some of the other things that they are clearly not equipped to handle and to their defense. But we do anyway. So we have to understand exactly what it is that we want the people to, what we want our police force to be able to do. If it's to protect and serve, well then what does that look like?
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, a little bit of empathy is a radical thing in this world, it feels like. Um, and it there's what's interesting about this topic is it brings up so much stuff, right? There's the conversation. We could talk for hours about every aspect of social injustice, of racism, of police overreach. Like there's so many different ways to sort of approach this. But ultimately, I feel like, yeah, it comes down to people on an honest, genuine level trying to communicate with each other and understand each other, like you were saying.
Now we have another question from probably one of our younger viewers, 9-year-old Mia, who asks, why does the book end in a cliffhanger?
That's great. I love that. That's something I think as a group, we're really trying to figure that out, right? Like it was, I think there's something about stories where we want them to end in a packed way, whether that be, a good ending or a bad ending or whatever, you want it to have an ending. And what I was finding last year while we're writing the book was there is no end to this, right? Like it would be dishonest to say that nothing will change. It would be dishonest to say that everything will change, right? Honestly, all you can really say at that point, especially last year, was we need to get to a point where we're willing to listen to each other, and we're willing to at least make that change, right? So it's a cliffhanger because in real life it's a cliffhanger, right? And I think that's also something that you kind of learn about as you get older. I feel like for me, what I learned about life is just one kind of big cliffhanger in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that you want to be handled and figured out and come to a resolution, and unfortunately that's just not what life looks like for a lot of things, especially for these subjects and these topics. But hopefully, and this is kind of what the end of the book is trying to suggest. Hopefully, there's a path to that kind of ending, that kind of resolution.
And I think it's also what maybe the unintended consequence of having that cliffhanger is, or maybe it was intended, was that that's the beginning of the conversation.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
now you have to think, okay, which path do I take? Which path do we get people to take here? But it provides that opportunity for dialogue now. What do
Correct.
you think is going to happen next? What do you think is going to happen next? It's almost like the choose your own ending, choose your own adventure books that we grew up with, so that you kind of got to choose the ending of the book. So we're leaving it now. So Mia, we're leaving it that open, that ending open for you to have that conversation with your friends, your family members, and to kind of draw your own ending, your own conclusions to this particular book.
And the ending of the book, we use a Dr. King quote. It reads, "Every man of humane convictions must decide on the protest that best suits his convictions, but we must all protest." And so I love that quote. And, it speaks to the point of the book, right? There's no right way to protest, right? So, I would encourage you to find ways to protest. And hopefully this book helps you kind of figure that out, what your voice is and how you want to speak up for injustice and how you want to affect the world. And the way you do it is as long as you're doing it, it's the right way.
Yeah, I noticed that you had in there about um the the good trouble that people can get into. I think that's something that Dante says when he's about to go out on another protest march, that he's going to get into good trouble. So see, you have brought in some of that nomenclature and quotes from current society. But I also want to get into, was there a double meaning, or was the double meaning intentional when you wrote in Jackson's journal, "The helmet makes it impossible to see the world clearly. The chest plate puts so much pressure on your heart." So I think he would, because you can see it from the physicalness, because he's in riot gear. And so with with the tear gas and everything, the physical aspect of being able to see through that visor is there. But then there's also the metaphysical, the beyond that being not being able to see the world clearly, as far as understanding where other people were coming from. You were just you didn't get to see all of that. And then with the chest plate, yeah, the physicalness of it did put the pressure on his chest, but it's also because of the situation that he was in specifically, is just weighing on his heart emotionally. So was that double meaning intentional, or again one of those happy circumstances?
It was absolutely intentional. Definitely wanted to play that up. Like Jackson, philosophically speaking, he's there to serve the community. That's why he became a police officer. He looks up to his grandfather because he sees this as a public good. Not, he's not trying to go out there and bust heads. He wants to, protect people, and he wants to, make his neighborhood shine. And he thinks a good way to do that is by being a law enforcement officer and serving in that way. And so when he's putting on that armor, right? I mean, like there's if you think about the idea of communicating with people, right? Like, there's all these weird sort of like, mannerisms that like when you're talking to someone, you don't want to be like this because it's off-putting. So imagine putting on armor and a helmet. It's like, how are we going to have a conversation when how are you going to serve and protect and what all that stuff with the people across the line if you're wearing all that, if you're wearing just entire getup. One of the lines in the book was uh, Jackson's his training officer says that it's us versus them, right? But Jackson kind of throws it back in his face and is like, "Well, my brother's out there. It's not us versus them. We are them. They are us. We are part of this." Policing is so strange because it's a very symbiotic relationship with the community, right? Like we give them the power to police us, right? So, it's this weird power dynamic thing it's interesting and it's strange, but for Jackson, like I said, that's not what policing for him is, right? And that's not what he wants it to be.
Yeah, and actually in the book, you actually disrobes. He takes off all of that gear in the middle of the conflict or the potential conflict to show that, yeah, I'm one of you, I'm also one of them, but we're in this together. And so because I guess the gear, the riot gear becomes that symbolic barrier and that physical barrier between the police and the community. So he decides to get rid of that barrier and become one with everyone, with the community there. But I want to get back to the follow-up that Mia had really quickly, because she wants to know if you are going to do a sequel or a continuation to the book, because she really liked reading it. I think that's a really good thing, that she
That's
liked
great.
reading the book and she wants to read more stuff from that you're producing.
Oh, that is fantastic. The publishers are on the line, so we'll talk to them. We'll see. We'll figure something out, Mia.
Mia's my new negotiator. Thanks, Mia. This just made it so easy.
So because of the, apparently, again, we have young Mia to account for this. So apparently the book is pretty successful and is resonating well with our young viewers, our young readers. So what are, I guess, some basic strategies that teachers can utilize to have these discussions around racism, and so forth, so that they can really begin the healing process?
Yeah, and obviously, if Steve or Adam or Ron want to jump in and chime in on anything about this, I wouldn't mind, because like I said, they're educators, right? But I think it's important to be able to talk, in a way that about this stuff that is productive, like we were saying before, right? Like I think when you start down this path, every time I have a conversation about the book with people, like I said, it becomes a focused conversation, as opposed to when you just start talking about this stuff. Sometimes it just leads you down. It's just, there's so many things you want to say and so many things that connect that you want to talk about. So I hope for educators, this book will be a focal point, right? Like something to help take all those thoughts and ideas and streamline them into something, that a conversation that can be productive, and it can be helpful for educators to get kids thinking about that next level. And like I said, also the way the book ends, and is important to what I've learned from working with licensed media or licensed learning, is that you have to ask questions to kids, right? Like, it's not necessarily enough to just come out and tell them, here are the answers. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, you want to actually be able to tell them, hey, here's the story. Now, what do you think, right? Like, now, where is your head with it? Like, what conclusions are you coming to? And that helps them sort of, hopefully develop critical thinking skills that will help them in other areas outside of just these heady, tremendous topics.
And I noticed at the end of the book, you also had some sample activities that teachers and parents or other caregivers can do with their students. So is there a plan in the works, perhaps, to develop a wider selection of activities, or maybe develop a workbook that will accompany this particular text?
Again, like I said, if anyone else on this call wants to chime in, that'd be great. But I would love to. I would love to figure something out and keep building on that conversation into the future.
Sure. I'll bring in our publishers for the book from Light Switch Learning to talk about this a little bit. Steve Sussman, would you like to say a couple of words or maybe on that topic?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And Kevin, thanks so much for hosting today. And you've asked some great questions. I'd like to introduce myself, Steve Sussman, and my brother Ron, and our publisher Adam, who's did an incredible job working with Jared to not only build this great story, to build the discussion questions, the the extension activities in the back of the book. And we've talked about doing a separate workbook and or a teacher's guide to really deepen those activities. I think a lot of it is going to come out of, and if Adam wants to jump in a moment, he's welcome to do so to expound on this. But as Jared does all these book talks, we just had a flurry as Black and Blue came out of about 3,000 books sold in the last 2 weeks. And so that was really incredible to see. And now some schools will choose to have book talks with Jared coming up soon, or they'll push those off to the fall. And I think out of that will come so many ideas. We want to see how these sessions go and figure out best practices based on the way it hits educators, the way it hits students. So I don't know if you wanted to add to that, Adam, or.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for the 6:30 p.m. Meeting. We've had a few of these, and I'm just amazed at the response from 9-year-olds, from 60-year-olds like myself and others. So I want to respond to a question earlier about, because teachers have asked me this, it's like, what are strategies for the classroom to enable you to deepen these conversations? So some of the strategies are, it's always important to recognize and state your own point of view. Once you set that stage, people are comfortable in possibly discussing their own point of view. So I think that's very, very important, is to speak from your own experiences. And the other piece of it that's super important is to be able to recognize differences, that they exist, but they don't definitely have to persist. So differences do exist, but they don't necessarily have to persist. And then I think at a very basic level is, and this is a difficult challenge, is really to acknowledge that race is important and it's in all of our lives. And don't make it the elephant in the room in a discussion, but acknowledge it and talk it through. And that was one of the challenges in creating the book is, race is about differences often. Well, in the same family, the two brothers have differences. And how do those differences play out? And how does that play out to the culture at large as well? So I think that's important. Also, Kevin, if you want to share the screen with me or give me the rights, I could show some scenes from the book, some visuals. I think that would be fun for everyone.
Oh, that would be great, because for some reason I didn't have those with me, but you should have ability at this point.
Can everyone see this?
You're not up yet.
It's loading.
It's still loading. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
So these are the characters: Jackson and Dante, Chandra the mother, Booker's the father, and Pop Pop, the esteemed venerated grandfather, and Dennis the police officer. There's Jared, everyone, up here. Does that really look like Jared? That's Jared's self-portrait. Here's the opening, the forward by our esteemed colleague and author and New York One Spectrum News anchor Cheryl Wills wrote the forward. There's a powerful quote from Cheryl that I always give her a hard time that we really like. It's the opening: "Black and Blue may be unlike any graphic novel you've ever read." Thanks to Cheryl. And here are some visuals. Kevin was talking about the shield, the mask, right? Separating oneself from the protest in a certain way. And how do you break through that barrier? Here are the two brothers as young boys. Jared, do you want to talk a little about the process of how you even organize a page and you think about it? Because I think you bring a really unique perspective to doing that and telling your narrative, and how you were so powerfully able to get the tension between the characters, even within frames on a page.
Yeah, sure. I think what's key about any art, anything you do, anything really, not even just art, is you start small, right? And you build and you build and you build, right? So a mistake I made when I was younger is you try to draw something and it didn't look like what it looked like in your head, and so you just give up. It's like, oh, it doesn't look like, it's like a masterpiece like it does when I imagine it, so what's the point? But as I got older, I realized, well, no, it'll never look that way, right? So you have to keep on building on it, building on it, and you know, and it'll look better and better. So I start very rough, you know, just trying to figure out the flow of the page. You know, you kind of want the panels to kind of like, because you're trying to tell a story, right? So you want to lead into each other in a lot of ways. So you want to direct the art and the dialogue and all that stuff. You just want to sort of figure all out in a very rough state, right? And once you kind of get the foundations in, then you just jump in and you just kind of have fun with it, right? You start drawing stuff out and, you know, kind of just expanding on the scene, you know, little details here and there to give the character some flourish. Yeah, and even with the colors, like it's definitely the most colorful book I've ever done. But I feel like once you kind of understand, you have the foundations down, and once you understand where you're going with it, everything else is just fun. It's just kind of like just sitting back and just trying to like, I guess, kind of like impress your inner child, right? Your inner artist is like, I want me to look at this page and go, wow, that was cool. You know what I mean? So so then, yeah, then it's a matter of just having fun. But before that, you just kind of got to work through the process of making sure you know where you're going with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I definitely think the story was it was definitely fair, a fair representation on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, as far as how everybody was depicted. Because even within the precinct, you had when the initial George Floyd's case was being seen, was being viewed. You saw the different comments that everybody was making, but it wasn't. But even then, you didn't draw the stereotypical racial lines that all the white officers were going to say this and all the black officers were going to say that. You actually had balance there, where you had a mixture of people who were who said what the typical answer would be, and then others who would say no, no, no. As police officers, we have to be better. So you gave them a good balance as far as those comments were concerned. So um, I think it probably would have gone over well with law enforcement. So actually, let me ask you that question, because I know you had an interview with some law enforcement personnel as well. How did they receive this particular book?
Yeah, no, it's been surprising in a good way. Like, you know, right, making the book, it was important to be truthful, you know, to be fair, but to be truthful, right? Like, I didn't want to just be like, oh yeah, everyone's, you know, this or that. You know, it's like I want to tell the truth, but and I want to be fair at the same time. But for, you know, police officers, yeah, like law enforcement, I had there's a organization, or Charlene Brown Wyan. Am I saying her? Wine.
Wyan.
There we go. Yeah, I love her. She's great. But she's an ex NYPD officer. Runs a like a thing called Living While Black and Blue. And you know, she liked it quite a bit, which was really flattering, because again, you just don't know. And you know, especially if you go off of like the news, or like, you know, just a lot of actions of the police out after the George Floyd video hit, and throughout the protests and stuff like that. There's a part of me that thought cops, no matter how I portray them, they're going to hate it, right? There's a part of me that thought that, but I was so surprised that, like, you know, someone like Charlene liked it. I had other police officers read it, and they were really into it. You know, I had one police officer who actually studied community outreach and community, you know, policing in college. And so, you know, when he read the book, he was like, oh, wow, that really ties into stuff I was learning when I was in college. So, you know, I think what's true of police is true of any group, right? They're not monolithic. Not everyone believes one thing, right? And so what this has shown me is that there's a lot of work to be done, and there's allies on either side, right? There are allies, you know, wearing blue, you know, who are tired of all this, right? They want things to change too. And I think part of it is it makes them look bad, right? Like it makes it harder for them to do their job when stuff like this happens. So yeah, I mean, it's but yeah, incredibly flattering. So, I mean, I'm sure I can't speak for every police officer, but
Right.
of the ones that I've given the book to, or have read the book and talked to me, it's been a very flattering response, which is fantastic.
We do have another question, and this question, I want you to really take special care with the answer to this question, because this is actually a former student of mine, and so
Okay.
I'm really proud of what she's been doing with her life and everything. So
I won't let you down.
here's her question: as a school counselor in training and an advocate for students, how does a young African American woman bring up these issues of racism and what is going on in our society, especially with policing, to an audience who is predominantly white, does not acknowledge that there is even an issue, and does not seem willing to learn or even to listen?
Wow, that's a.
I know
You didn't make it
I
easy.
don't mean to
You didn't
drop
make
that bomb on you and everything, but I think that's exactly what this book is for,
Right,
to
right,
begin that dialogue, that conversation. And again, it's not just for the black kids and the Latino kids in class. It's for the white kids too. It's for the white teachers too. It's for everybody to be able to be. You're going to see yourself someplace, and you
right.
need to be able to begin that conversation, because if we don't start it someplace, we're never going to have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, the world, the world is what the world is in a lot of ways, and you know, we sit here and we fight and to change the world and to make it different. Um, but it's tough because, you know, yeah, my response to the answer would be read the book, and maybe the book will help uh, create a conversation where, you know, people are willing to people are willing to listen to you, you want to listen to them, and for me, that's I make the joke that I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood. I'm in a black family, and I went to a white school, right? So like there was a lot of different, you know, just cultures surrounding me, you know. And what I found was listening to other people means that it's not always the case, right? It's not always the case, but when you listen to other people, they're more willing to listen to you, right? Like I said, it's not always the case. Sometimes you're sort of yelling into the wind, right? Um, but it's a start, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I mean, it's real tough. I mean,
Yeah.
because like I said, some people aren't ready to listen, right? And in some ways, if you're not willing to listen, then, you know, then you're not willing to change, right? But it doesn't mean you don't, right? It doesn't mean you stop. And I would I would say be patient. That's what
Yeah.
I learned. Like you know, in my travels, I've been told that I'm like the first black person that someone's had a conversation with, right? And they have, and you know, before they meet you, they have all kinds of expectations and you know, weird things in their head about who you are without even knowing you, right?
Right.
And so when even talking to you, even being a voice of let's say reason, but just being a calm voice who's able to, again, what we we're talking about before, able to express what you're about and what you see, what you want the world to be. If you're able to do that in a compelling way, then I feel like you're going to win some hearts. And you know, those people who don't want to listen, you know, some of them will start listening, right? You know, some of them won't. But again, you know, it's, you know, if you're doing what you're doing, I'd imagine not because it's easy, but it's something you love to do and something you feel that's important. So, you know, I would say don't get cynical, or don't get cynical about not reaching everyone, but reach the people you can, and just keep your head, keep your head
Yeah.
up, and keep your head down to the grind, and I think you can accomplish a lot.
Steve, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we're Light Switch Learning. I mean, we have some incredible contributors. In fact, we have more minority authors than we do white authors, and that's by design. And the whole idea is that it's not just about learning about your own culture. And this isn't a book that was created just for Black and brown children or minority children to understand what it's like to feel racial injustice. Because the only way to reduce racism, to reduce prejudice, is to get all students to understand. And maybe it's something along the lines of, I could see a lesson around telling a group of white students, can you imagine you get your driver's license, and I don't know whether we're dealing here with middle school students or elementary or high school, but you get your driver's license and you drive down the road and you get pulled over just because you're black or you're brown, or you're getting racially profiled. And for white children to understand the privilege that they have in this regard, I think is so important. So I think this is where empathy comes in. Certainly, this young woman is training to be a guidance counselor. We have programs that teach about empathy and show stories of people showing empathy towards each other. So I think this is all part of this lesson. And what happened last year with all of the Black Lives Matter protests and all the senseless deaths, and COVID as well. Let's take positives out of these experiences and turn them into teachable moments. That's the way that we really see this. And this will be part of our process to help build activities around this. And the whole idea of every story that we create is to have a particular lesson. In fact, we have one of our other authors on the line, and that is Mia's mother, 9-year-old Mia's mother, Kiani Antigua, who tells stories about Kiara, which is a caricature of Kiani when she was a young child, and how she was made fun of because she had very curly hair that's very common in Caribbean countries, especially Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And for kids to have made fun of her for her hair, that was racist, that was prejudiced. And she tells a story about how, as she got older, she realized her hair was her power. And then she wrote a second book with Kiara called Kiara and the Virus, teaching lessons about how to stay safe during coronavirus. So you can see how these stories all weave into each other. And maybe I'm foreshadowing an upcoming instruction discussion that may involve multiple authors talking about similar connections and similar social emotional learning themes. So, that's my thought on the situation. And we have to have people of all color, race, creed to combine together to make this story impactful.
No, I think you raise an interesting point, or a really good point, when you mentioned about the empathy. If we have to be really empathetic towards one another, because as you were talking, I was thinking about the line from A Time to Kill, the John Grisham book, and where the victim or the main protagonist in the story was, or the issue in the story was about the young black girl who was unfortunately raped by some white people in the community, and beaten and so forth. And so the Matthew McConaughey's character at the end, when he was giving his closing argument, told the jury, now close your eyes and imagine all this horrific stuff that's been going on, that happened to this young lady. But now that imagine her being white. And what is your decision going to be as far as convicting these people? And I think that part of the movie just, it brought everybody to cheers and everything, because it forces people to literally step into somebody else's shoes, step into their skin for a little while. Again, be empathetic so that you can kind of understand where they're coming from. And so I think is powerful, that we're able to empathize with one another to really build that understanding. And like you said, you have a lot of these other culturally relevant books that are available, and authors who are writing, who might be, the books are available for teachers to use in their classrooms. The authors can probably come and do a talk as well. I think you have that Make It Happen tour coming up, and I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit more on that in a moment. But you have all of these opportunities that are become possible because we want to actually sit down and listen and have these, and be willing to have these hard conversations.
Kevin, I hope we did you proud with that answer. I hope your ex-student, enjoyed those answers.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can do no wrong in her eyes. I know that, but no, you all did extremely well with it with your responses, and I'm sure she will definitely take that into heart. But she actually does have a follow-up question that says, well, again, with her when dealing with her African American students now, is she being counterproductive if her ideations and thoughts of the students are opposite of what's triggering to other counselors? So in other words, is she being counterproductive to her African American students by speaking to them in a way that is different than the way that other counselors may speak to them or may perceive them?
I don't know, like, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but it
Well,
feels
because
like,
all the other counselors are white. And so, of
right.
course, they're going to have a particular way of speaking to the students and reacting to the students and so forth. And now, I guess this student doesn't want to come across as being coddling, doesn't want to come across as being um, too lenient with the black students in the school. So how can she balance that?
I mean, you got to be honest, right? You got to be honest with yourself and who you are, and bring that to, you know, to your students, right? I mean, like, I mean, if you feel a connection to those students because you're black and they're black, I mean, I don't know if I see it as that's a boon, right? That's something that maybe will help you. Um, I mean, obviously, you don't want to go easier on them, right? But I mean, like, but treating them using your connection, I think um, could help them feel more comfortable around you and more comfortable, you know, coming to you or even coming to other people for help. Like, you know, I imagine I'm not an educator, but I imagine being an educator is a very hard job. You know, I've known many educators. It's a very hard job, right? And so whatever tools at your disposal you can use
Yeah.
to better serve your students, you
And
should use
and I
those
think
tools.
and I think just to kind of piggyback off of that, it's a matter of, like I said, being real with them, using that real language that they're going to be able to definitely understand, because students know when you're being fake with them. So don't be fake with them. But also, you want to show them that you're going to speak to them as opposed to speaking at them. And so that's when they start to build that trust in you, when you're speaking to them and really listening to what they have to say and taking their words into consideration. Because the bottom line is, we want students to be able to come to adults when they have problems, as opposed to either solving them themselves or turning to their peers who don't know anything either. So it's like the blind leading the blind in that case. And the only way that students are going to come to the adults is if they feel they trust them. And how do you build that trust? By having real conversations with them, by taking their words into consideration and listening to what they have to say as well. And again, and like I said, speaking to them as opposed to speaking at them. So I know, Steve, I think we wanted to, as we begin to close, because the hour is upon us, but as we begin to close, I wanted you to address the Make It Happen tour and tell us, what is that about and how can schools get involved with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Kevin. So we have a wide variety of culturally responsive and relevant authors. Like I mentioned, the majority of our authors are minorities, so that we can have young students in underserved communities understand uh, people that have overcome the odds, that have overcome poverty or loss or other major challenges, disability, in order to become incredibly successful and tell their powerful stories. So you can feel free to check us out at www.lightswitchlearning.com. And we'd love to hear from you and talk to you a little bit about how we can get these authors in front of your school, your district. If you're not in education, but you have children or other kids in school that are close to you, we're more than happy to talk to any schools, nonprofits, so that we can spread the word on this great message And, like I said, Jared and Kiani, who I just mentioned a moment ago, and Cheryl Wills are just three authors out of many that we have that have a similar type of positive message that promotes, strong ethics in young kids.
Thank you, Steve. I definitely appreciate you sharing that information with us.
Sure.
So Jared, do you have anything that you would like to leave us with?
Oh man, thank you so much everyone for tuning in, for coming here, and thank you for Kevin for having me on. Yeah, we just hope this book could empower students, to just want to find their voice, right? To find their form of protest. Yeah, it's it's being someone who read books all their lives and all that stuff. It's really flattering to think that the book could have an effect on anyone. So, but if it does, that'd be fantastic. And yeah, I'm rambling. I'm sorry, but I hope that the book is found in that what I'm trying to say. I hope the book is received in that spirit of empowerment and of, I guess, reconciliation, but honest reconciliation.
Yes, I think it has been. I think it's been very well received. It's definitely very, very well written, and put together, and it's appealing. And I mean, if you have really young students, I mean, a 9-year-old that's still elementary school who's found something that they can take away from this book, then it has an impact on the people that is targeted towards. So I want to definitely thank you for writing this book and putting this project together, and for coming on our show today.
Thank you, man.
And again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to those of you who tuned in. Thank you to again to Jared Sams, who is the author and illustrator of this graphic novel Black and Blue. And thank you to the producers and the publishers, Light Switch Learning and Steve Sussman and his crew for being here as well. I want to thank all of you for tuning in to this extra special edition of Instruction Discussion. And we want to make sure that you will be able to tune in whenever we actually have the show, and when we go forward with the extra shows that we're going to come up with later on. I think we are going to put together a Make It Happen tour with other authors on Instruction Discussion as well. So look out for future episodes in the future coming up. And we hope that you all have a wonderful evening. And please stay safe out there. And let's see other ways that we can begin the conversation to begin the healing process in our communities. Have a good evening.